This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten podcast, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swintowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. So welcome to episode 5 of the Night Fishing for Trout series on the Troutbitten podcast. This is the one you've all been waiting for. Tonight we're here to talk about fishing the topwater. And yes, that means mouse patterns, sometimes. We'll also dig into a fly style that we feel is more effective, sometimes, with the emerger concept at night. And we'll talk about fishing streamers after dark. This is a jam-packed episode full of tactics talk, so let me quickly introduce my friends that are here with me tonight. Here is Dr. Trevor Smith. What's up, bud?
Hey, how we doing?
Good. Trevor, I have a question for you and for the other guys too. Do you remember the first time you caught a trout after dark? Like that first night or that first really solid hit? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, my first night out night fishing was actually a night of a lot of action. It felt like, I don't know that I've had a night like it since. They've just felt like there were trout everywhere.
Yeah.
But there weren't a lot of fish caught. So it was really exciting, and there was a lot of action early on, and there was a lot of disappointment too. It was sort of just like trying to figure out what was going on, because I got a lot of hits, but not a lot of hookups. But the first trout that I ended up landing was a really nice 20-inch brown with a nice hook jaw. And there's a picture of him on one of the night fishing articles for Troutbitten. And you'll recognize it because I have a look on my face of pure horror as I'm staring at the fish. I think it's like my general night fishing face. But I remember being like, just in general, kind of terrified of what was happening at night. And I was afraid to, I grew up on the Allegheny up north, and we used to night fish for catfish, like channel cats, and for carp. And I just got used to pulling like just monsters out of black water. They're just like massive fish. But trout fishing was so much scarier because I was in the water. I was like interacting with it. I wasn't like on the bank fishing. So I just remember feeling like I was kind of, I don't know. It was an interesting feeling. But my face in that photo, if people can find it, I don't remember which article it was a part of, but it really summarizes my feelings about that first night.
That's cool to have that history, though, of catching other species, at least in the dark. That's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Josh Darling is here of Wilds Media. Josh, same thing, man. Like, do you remember the first one that you caught or had a really solid hit?
Yeah, definitely. And we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, but it was with Austin. Gosh, Austin, what year was that? Was that our freshman or sophomore year of college?
From my fishing log, I think it was 2015.
Mm-hmm.
From my fishing log.
Listen to this guy.
Yeah.
Fishing log.
Yeah, so we went and fished a smaller stream really close to us, and we were like, let's go see what this is like. And we actually did stand on the bank, and we just cast into like still water. And a lot of the same rules to what I've learned since applied, in that they were still on the bank, but it was like 2 feet from us. Yeah. So I remember the fish that I did hook into were like, I would cast way out into the water, and I'd, start stripping in towards me with a mouse pattern and strip, and it'd get like 3 feet from me on the bank, and that's when it would take. And so it was a wild experience, but yeah.
Austin, what about you? Austin Dando is here.
Yeah, Josh, that's same memories, man. I still have some of those old streamers and old mouse flies that we tied back then, and they just look so ridiculous. Like, bring the fishies at night. These are going to work.
Catch fish, though.
Yeah, and I think it was on one of our second or third trips until I actually caught something, and it was casting to the far bank and catching a fish off the far bank just by the chance that it wasn't in the middle where we were trying to like make most of our presentations probably, but the opposite bank than what we were standing on.
Which would have been a really far cast from where we were standing.
Yeah, well,
That's funny you said about the flies being ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure they're still catching fish, right? I told you Aiden has been really into bass fishing and fishing for different things. And he's been doing some topwater stuff with, like rubber frogs, like floating frogs, popping frogs and stuff. He wanted to buy these 2 frogs. His birthday's coming up. I'm like, here we go. He wants these 2 frogs. They're like $15 each. I'm like, come on, man. But okay. I said, hey, try not to lose these in a tree, right? So this was yesterday, and I asked him when he got back, I said, how was it? Because he went with a neighbor. And this is really neat. He's doing this independently. And he's like, well, I didn't catch anything on those expensive frogs. And he goes, but there was this one spot, and I really didn't want to cast. So I just didn't cast to it because I didn't want to lose the frog. I said, oh. And he goes, but then later we went back because they went to get lunch or something. He said, so we stopped at this like real small bait shop, and they had these really ratty frogs. That's what he said, these really ratty frogs. The real cheap ones. He paid like $3 for this rubber frog. He said, I cast it in there when we got back to that spot, and I hooked them. Topwater. And
That's cool.
That's
awesome.
what we need to use, right? But yeah, he used, and he showed me. I could show you guys all 3. They're sitting on my desk right now. And yeah, I mean, the ratty one, I mean, it's low rent, man. You can tell it's $3. It doesn't matter a lot of times, you know? First of all, just get yourself out there. You know, it's like all
Absolutely.
fishing. You're not catching anything if you're not there.
That's true. That really is true.
I honestly don't remember the first time I ever went night fishing, but I remember what really got me going. And this wasn't more than a couple trips in, 2 or 3 trips in. And I was using a Harvey pusher that I tied myself. And I was really on my home water. I knew it really well. And I actually had landed, I think I'd landed another one like on a little wet fly, a medium size, let's say, wet fly a little bit earlier. But this is the memory because something big. I still swear it's the biggest fish I've ever had on in that water. And something hit really hard in a tail out. And I'm like, it's on. And then it's off. It was, it was there for like 3 seconds. And I mean, it was big. And the way that it hit, and I was just swinging it. And oh my. And I still, every time I walk the dog past that spot a lot of times. Every time I go past there, I'm like, that's where it all started.
That's cool.
That fish has to be expired. But man, that was a big fish. I mean, the water was not knee deep even. So there was a lot of splashing, and because I wasn't more than 30 feet away. My gosh, that was a big fish. Maybe I foul hooked a sucker, huh?
Probably.
Yeah, right. Probably. That's way less fun to think that, though.
Or a carp. Anyway, let's get into it, guys. Let's move into our topic because we have a lot to cover. So we acknowledged last week that we've built this podcast series a little bit differently than many listeners might have expected. And I've had a number of people getting in touch to ask about mouse flies and streamers. And they've asked, too, about fishing wet flies and nymphs. And that's fair. Everyone is curious about that stuff. It's kind of the first question everybody asks. What fly were you using? How are you fishing it? That's fair. And to this point, I've referred people to the articles on Troutbitten because remember, there's a full night fishing for trout series on the Troutbitten website, 30 articles deep. That covers everything that we talk about here in, I'll say, different detail, not necessarily more detail. I think it's cool to have both formats. With all of the input from you guys, we cover things in a very different way than I did when I was writing those articles by myself. But with this episode, we're ready to tackle the rigging and the flies. We'll talk tactics for topwater, for emergers, what we call emergers, and for streamers too. But let me point out that in this skills series, we've already covered a lot about how we fish these flies. Remember, we discussed this in the drifting and swinging episode in great detail. We've talked it through about different parts of the water column, about matching retrieve speeds to the water type and the conditions. And last week, we discussed in depth about picking water, making a plan, and then, the things that might convince us to adjust that plan. I'd also argue that being comfortable on the water, understanding what lights to carry and how to use them, along with recognizing the different natural light conditions that we encounter, all of that is more important than the specific tactics or the flies themselves, which is what we covered in the first 2 episodes of this podcast series. Lastly, as you listen to this Night Fishing for Trout series, you'll hear a constant theme that night fishing is full of failure, that it's okay to get skunked. In fact, it's expected. And that no matter what you might read or hear about the night game, it is not easy or predictable, especially if you're fishing for wild trout in wild places and you're getting after them in all seasons. Night fishing is simply a different mystery, and that's why we love it. Now, let's talk about topwater then. Let's do it. No doubt, the modern night fishing game, what everybody talks about most is mousing. It's about topwater. Guys, why is that? What do you think?
Man, I think it's so different than what we do for trout otherwise. Typically we're, especially in fly fishing, so much of the presentations are delicate, and we're trying to work with finesse and get a dead drift and not spook the fish and work tactically. It's just all this like carefulness, and throwing a mouse just feels like such a like, it's so different in a sort of refreshing way, from what you're used to doing. And it's I think that's one reason it's really kind of attractive.
Yeah, I'd say there's less left to the imagination with mouse fishing because it is on top. And for that reason, I do think that in a way, even if the presentation isn't necessarily easier, in a way it is easier because you're not having to picture everything, and you can kind of see it. And when a strike happens, it's explosive and it's exciting, and you know that it's happening.
Nice. I agree with that. I think it is easier because of that. The strike detection, there's not much question. You can hear it, right? And lots of times, like you said, you can see it. I like what you said, Trevor. It's what we do with trout fishing has to be so careful, so often, so careful. And mouse, topwater stuff is not careful.
Yeah.
Do you splat them down on purpose sometimes to get their attention?
For sure. Absolutely. I don't try to like whip it down, but I definitely am not trying to like land it softly. A lot of times, and I've heard this happen at night. I've heard a splat on the water next to a bush or under a bush, and then I've heard the fish take, and I don't know what it was that fell out of the bush, whether it was a baby bird falling out of a nest, or a mouse or whatever, or a moth, But I think that something about those trout that are sitting near the bank, they're expecting and waiting for something, whether that's bait fish in the shallows or a crayfish or a frog jumping in or something falling into the water.
Right on. The getting's good over there in the shallows.
Yeah, it is. So
it's a lot like terrestrial fishing in the summertime, whether it's grasshoppers out west, let's say,
Yeah.
They're ready for it. I would say too, we're talking about how you can hear it. And I know what you're saying. Like you'll hear a slurp sometimes, whether that's your fly or they're slurping something else. That's one of the reasons I do love fishing the flats and the slower water, because of course, when you get in the faster water, you don't hear that. And that element of it is kind of missing. And I miss that. I think it's a really neat thing that is different, again, about this topwater. It's the topwater strike that we're really talking about. That's what makes it so exciting. That's what makes it so explosive.
Yep.
And again, easier then to detect the strikes, easier to know that you're fishing it well, I think. It's just an unmatched experience. There's a lot of adrenaline there.
Yeah, it's so extreme. It's so
extreme.
And
it's an extreme
how
sport,
odd it
Austin.
is fishing at night. Like how much more weird can you make it than fishing with the mouse? Like it's kind of just it's like a fun way to do it. I think it's just fun.
It's a mammal.
Like it's just so silly. Let's go fish at midnight and throw a mouse. Like we never do that.
That's right.
So.
Is it really fly fishing if you're mimicking a mammal?
That's a good question. They're not really fly fishing.
Yeah, exactly. We should throw back that question to whoever asked us the question about his
all
his friend.
His friend.
Everybody. His split shot,
That's right.
Anyway, all we did a full episode on that. Like we called it, "That's Not Fly Fishing." Remember that?
Yep.
We did that last season. Yeah, that's not fly fishing. We went through all the things that people say are not fly fishing, but I don't think we brought up mousing. No. That's not fly fishing. Mousing, you've got a mammal on the end. That's not right.
It's weird.
Oh, cool. Hey, what's your favorite mouse pattern then? Let's just say pure mouse. Let's stay away from what we're going to call mouse emergers here in a second. What's your favorite pure mouse pattern?
The Moorish mouse. We'll go with that. Yep, I like it. I've got a lot of Moorish mouse with teeth marks on them.
I know.
They get chewed up.
That was my first mouse pattern, was the Moorish mouse. And then, that one's tied with deer hair, I started doing what a lot of people will do is tie it, with palmered rabbit strips. And then I got into Mr. Hanky. If anybody's
right on.
not tried Mr. Hanky, I like
Mr. Hanky too.
I like that stinger hook back there. And it's got a little bit more of a round profile, I suppose. But it's a pure mouse. It's up top.
Nice big foam tab on it.
Yeah, keeps it going. And like Trevor said, I love looking at that foam and seeing the history of hits. That's neat. Do you guys use, that deer hair mouse? Like if you Google mouse fly.
Yeah.
What you see is that deer hair, stacked deer hair.
When Josh and I first started night fishing, that's what we would tie. We'd
Like a mouse
tie,
rat. Yeah.
we'd tie like really tightly packed mouse flies and then shave them down to the size of a, kind of like a round top and a flat bottom with a chenille tail or a zonker tail or something. And, they'd work, and we tie them in various sizes, but I don't know, something about them. I seem to get a lot of reaction strikes, but maybe it's just the way that the patterns we were trying, but they never seem to produce as well as some of these other variants we fish now.
No, I'm with you. Even the Morris Mouse, and especially Mr. Hankey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And often we're a single hook too, and sometimes, like you said, on the Mr. Hankey on the trailer hook, we were fishing some pretty big hooks too. I don't know. It all depends on the waterway. But.
With that deer hair, there's a lot for their mouth to push away. As they're trying to eat it, I think they're pushing it away.
Especially if it's not trimmed very well.
Well, yeah. For the night angler, our biggest challenge is simply knowing where the fly is and how it's drifting. That's why a glow-in-the-dark fly line is an essential tool for the modern fly angler after dark. The Rio Gold Lumalux is an excellent glow-in-the-dark fly line. We use it in sizes 5 and 6. This weight-forward line has a long head and a back taper that combines power, control, and stability. The Rio Gold Lumalux is well suited for loading a fly rod with beefy night flies at close range, where so much of the best night fishing action happens. The Lumalux charges quickly with a flashlight and holds a strong glow for 20 to 30 minutes. The line is finished with the Rio's slick cast coating, creating a slick and durable line that lasts for years. Spool up with the Rio Lumalux glow-in-the-dark fly line and change your night game. For over a decade, Smith Creek has designed innovative, high-quality fly fishing accessories made to put your gear in easy reach, free up your hands, and keep our waters clean. Check out the all-new tippet holder. Each unit is individually machined from billet aluminum and anodized in 2 eye-catching colors. They hold up to 5 tippet spools with a spring-loaded plunger that is quick and easy to use. The brand new Rod Clip Plus comes with a stiff 304 steel pin and integrated carabiner clip, giving you 2 ways to attach it to your vest or pack. All Smith Creek products are built guide tough and backed by solid customer service. To learn more about Smith Creek products, visit their website at smithcreek.co. There's a lot of good ways to do it. There's a lot of other kind of topwater patterns out there beside a mouse too. I'll bring that up. Like I still have them in my box. I have a set of gurglers that I tied. Is it Jack Gartside? Is that his name? Who created the gurgler? I think I have that right. And whatever, people fish gurglers of all different styles for all different species. It's almost like a clouser the way it's so universally used. Gurgler's a good one. Got a foam tab there. Poppers. I've used bass poppers.
Yeah, I have too. Yeah, I caught a trout on a white bass popper.
Yep.
That's a cool idea. I haven't done that.
Oh, dude, I feel like I've used everything. I told you I fished a lot of Rapalas. The F1, I think it's the F1. It's floats on top, and if you retrieve it, it dives a little bit, and then it as soon as you stop retrieving, it starts lifting, and you can pop it a little bit. And bass poppers are fun, and just different bass bug styles. Anything you'd use. Again, I should take one of Aiden's rubber mice.
Right.
Fish that 6-weight. I can do it. Get it out there.
Or that raggedy frog.
Yeah. Why do you guys think mousing is, well, not just say mousing. Why do you think the topwater stuff is so effective when it is just the pure topwater?
It's a good question. I mean, I do think we talked about this a little bit earlier on in this season, but just like trout using their lateral lines are dependent upon disturbance and vibration. And when you are fishing on the surface, you are offering a fair amount of that. And I do think, we fish the warmer months in general, and that's when mousing is more effective. And I think for those seasons, the trout have been accustomed to looking up more often than some of the other seasons through the winter. So I think, maybe they're looking out, maybe they're expecting food forms higher in the water column in the summer, and then also just the ability to locate prey.
Yeah.
I think it can come down to the angler too. You turn the lights off and you sort of need every advantage you can get. And if you're fishing flies on the bottom, it's pretty easy to get hung up in the nighttime and then have to walk over or wade over to those areas that you might have been fishing, kick out fish that do who knows what to the fish upstream or downstream. To be able to fish a fly that's on the surface the whole time and be able to have a little bit better feel, maybe a little bit better visual cues of that fly in some nights, and just not having to hang up on the bottom allows for some clean fishing and some just more efficient fishing that may add up to extra minutes on the water.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, I buy that.
I think the whole topwater thing, it's just, I think the fish are going, what the hell is that? We've talked before whether we think they actually eat it for a mouse or why do they, I don't know. Why do they eat a gurgler? What the heck's that look like? Right. It's just the what the hell is that kind of thing. Or maybe they do get territorial. Maybe like, I'm eating that. You're getting out of there. You know?
Right. They just slash at it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing on the topwater, where is it most effective? What do you guys find?
I do best with the topwater in slower water.
Not the fastest,
No, and the reason being, I feel like I have less control over a topwater fly because they're often very next to no weight built into the fly. Yeah. So when they get in that fast water and they just rip right through the rapids or through the riffles, a fish may have next to no chance to actually coming up and eating that once they realize it's there. So I like to be able to manipulate the fly and control the fly and keep it in certain places for certain amounts of time. And that's much easier to do for me on topwater and slower moving areas.
That makes sense.
And I think even back to the lateral line location in riffles, the trout may have trouble distinguishing the sound of the riffles from the fly that you're playing through it, and I think you offer a lot better chance for them to locate it if you are just seeking out those fish that are in shallower, slower, and more like protected or buffered lies.
I'm with you on all that. I will say there have been times when I'm just, we call it trolling, right? If I'm just moving from one spot to the next, I often will just let my fly hang 30, 40 feet below me. Yeah. And sometimes I've been very surprised. It's in the riffles.
Pick up a fish like that.
You pick up a fish. Like we do stuff. I know you guys do that. And like, why wouldn't you? You know, if you know you're not going to get hung up and cause yourself more of a problem than it's worth.
For sure.
Why not? And I've learned so much just on silly stuff like that. You go, man, all right, maybe I should target the riffles. Right.
Seems like once I try to do that, though, and I hang it down there for 40 seconds and pretend like I'm walking away again, they never come up and eat it.
No, it's always a one. Yeah, you're like, let me reproduce that. No.
Right. I'm on to something.
Right.
Yeah. It has to be an unconscious.
Yeah.
That's the part that we're missing when we try to do it. It's too damn deliberate. That happens in the daylight all the time too. You're like, oh, I got to reproduce that. Then you waste half your day trying to, like, dang, it never worked again.
The dead troll, the true dead drift only happens if you're unconscious of it.
Hey, we should point out Josh Darling. He left us. What happened? He's gone.
I don't know. He left his charger somewhere. I don't know. Sounds like a problem that adults wouldn't have.
Or like a professional who makes videos and stuff on his computer.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah,
he might have a backup cord hanging around.
I also like that he was like, no, please wait like an hour later than you were planning to do the podcast, and then he's out in the first 15 minutes.
That's true. He held us up.
And then he cut out.
It wasn't his iPad, it's his iMac. Like it's always the latest, greatest iMac too. But it apparently only came with one charging cable, which is at work. I think he just wanted to go out night fishing. I bet that's what he's doing.
Yeah,
he's out fishing while we're talking about it.
He should be out fishing. If
that's what he did last week. It was after we were done, he went fishing. All right, so he's out. Yep. We got no more.
Bye, Josh.
We got no more Josh information for the rest of the podcast. That's all right.
There goes the authority.
That's right. The expert's gone. So you're left with us.
Second, third, and fourth best.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about what we call mouse emergers for a minute. And then we'll get into rigging and technique for all of this, because I don't think there's much difference in how we fish a pure topwater mouse, like we just talked about, versus an emerger. But we'll see. I want to hear what you guys have to say. First, what do we mean by this mouse emerger? We did a full podcast about this concept.
Yep.
In season 1. it's 2 years ago. It was in a winter actually when we did this. It was Josh and Trevor that joined me. And I mean it, the full podcast is on the Mouse Emerger. I'll leave a link to that. And so we're not going to spend a ton of time on just the Mouse Emerger. We've already done it for an hour. Go listen to that. That resource is there, just like there's all these articles on the Troutbitten website for you. But we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't address it here too. So the Mouse Emerger, guys, like, why do we call it that?
Yeah, I mean, what we talked about is how it sits in this like in between land between the top water and the underneath water, where part of the fly sits above, part of the fly sits below. It's not riding as high as some of the classic mouse patterns, and yet it does offer that surface presentation, but it also offers a bit of an easier ask for the trout because they can really accept that fly and take it
Right on.
under the surface. And a lot of times you will hear a different type of take with the pure mouse versus what, you know, these Mouse Emergers.
Good point.
I don't feel like they're quite as loud and splashy takes, but it's more of like you hear the surface disturbance from the fish for sure, but it's more of a swirl and a take, just because I think, you know, a lot of that eat is underwater. And you know, it really changed the night game for a lot of us in terms of our ability to get a better hookup percentage on surface fishing.
Oh yeah.
Underwater fishing seems a lot more reliable in general in terms of hookups for me, but in terms of surface fishing, those first, you know, attempting to fish a pure mouse pattern for me has always been a high degree of failure, I guess, when it comes to hooking
and
up.
it's not your
a lot
fault.
of misses.
Right.
They do just slash at it on purpose. You said you'll still hear it. I'll say there's been plenty of times where I don't hear it, and it's actually a very subtle take, and I think they take that the underneath part. A lot of these Mouse Emerger patterns, we'll talk about in a minute, are articulated, and literally the back hook hangs down in the water. Now, it's only hanging a half inch down there, maybe an inch at the most, depending how big the fly is. The Bad Mother, though, for example, it's just one hook. There's sometimes I'll put a stinger hook on the back, but it angles down. It's just the angle. The deer hair head keeps it up, and then the back half is just palmered marabou, and it's hanging down in the water. Kind of best of both worlds, like you said, Trevor. It's like you get the wake on the surface,
right,
and then the availability and the low risk just under the surface.
Which I think is why it is so important that it does both, you know, because you don't want to miss the wake. You don't want to miss that disturbance, but you also don't want to totally abandon the fact that the trout may be more likely to hook up if they have an underwater eat. They just seem more accurate, you know, and I think we've all seen, you know, like I've been fishing at night with some moonlight and been able to see a fish totally miss my fly by sometimes 8 inches, you know, and especially with a pure surface pattern where I think they feel the disturbance, they sense it, but because it's so purely on the surface, they just don't locate it as well. It's just kind of wild to see sometimes how far off they are. But I don't feel like I have that happen. Well, I don't have that happen nearly as often with that emerger type presentation.
I think I get more hits too. It's asking less of the trout. Like you said, it really changed the game for you. It changed for me. I used to fish that Moorish mouse. If I was on top, I was the Moorish mouse guy. And then I really got into Mr. Hankey. I was getting more hits from that. And I think that's because it sits even lower in the water.
Yeah.
And then I got this idea for the Bad Mother from Rich Strolis. A pattern he was tying. And I did something similar. But it's basically Rich's pattern. And that made a big difference. At the time, we weren't calling it a Mouse Emerger. And later on, Josh and Trevor and I started, this is like an emerger. It is. It's the emerger concept. It's the same thing.
It's a great way to think about it.
It is, right? With dries.
Yeah. The first exposure I had to the Mouse Emerger before it was, I guess, coin Mouse Emerger would have been the Bad Mother, but that was before I realized why it was effective. And I think the Pendragon, which was what, you know, Trevor and Josh developed, was what taught me that. And the Pendragon, which I would say is my favorite of the Mouse Emerger concepts, that it does a really great job of offering a good looking profile on top while offering, again, a tantalizing meal beneath it.
For sure.
And it wasn't until I started fishing that fly and catching fish on the back hook, especially, sometimes more often than not, to realize, oh, well, maybe they do see that wake above, and then they feel secure enough to take the tag or the articulated back half below and still feel somewhat concealed. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, the stories you hear about night fishing, I think we all we want to believe that these big brown trout, especially, you're just out there with reckless abandon, like, I'm going to eat whatever I want to eat, I'm going to go get it. And like they have no caution. And they're still cautious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a misgiving about night fishing in general, is that you go night fishing because you're going to go catch big ones, or it's like easier to catch them at night because they're always out there, they're feeding in the shallows. Like, it's not like that, at least for our area. I don't go out there expecting or having the intention to only go after big fish, but that's aside.
It is. And we've talked that through, what the different goals are. You guys know, I sent you text. The last 2 times I fished, I just went where, man, there's no way I was catching a fish that was bigger than 16, 17 inches.
Yeah.
But I learned so much on those waters about being in the water at night and fishing and being comfortable. Yeah. And I dialed in, as good as I have to this point, I dialed in a nice wet fly game after night. That's where I kind of got the idea for doing this bad mother the way that I like to do, and the wiggle and hang. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. So many things on that water because it's super close to me too. And it's not about big fish. I don't care. Mm-hmm. I just want to land a fish. I just want to fool them. I just want to fish at night.
Just want to catch fish
every day.
Yeah.
Like Aiden.
Just want to fish all
the time. Hey, we mentioned the Pendragon, which is that's a Trevor and Josh creation. And then I love that bad mother. I'll tell you what, guys. For me, the reason I think I like that Pendragon so much is it is a bigger profile. It's longer.
Yeah.
And the bad mother, I've tried articulating it and putting marabou palmered on a hook shank on the back, but it makes it too heavy. What I've started doing was another thing that Rich did, but I don't know. I only ever did it with like 2 or 3 flies, and I didn't fish them very much. But now I'm starting to again, putting feathers on the back. That's not uncommon. Musky flies. Anytime you want to lengthen a fly, put some saddle hackles on the back or whatever. Feathers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten to really target bigger fish, areas where we expect to catch bigger fish and want that bigger profile, that longer length like we have with the Pendragon.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to give that a try. That'll still keep it very light. Those are 2 very different flies. They cast, like the Pendragon's heavy. Well, water weight, the water weight of the Pendragon, and yet it still stays up.
Yeah. That front end is pretty buoyant, especially if you wind that deer hair really well. And I'll oftentimes apply some floatant to that deer hair too. Sometimes, I'll try to pre-treat it before the night just to keep that front end riding high. There's been nights that it obviously has worked well under the surface, but
all these flies can do a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. The last one I'll bring up is Tommy Lynch's white belly mouse. I've had good success on that.
Yeah.
And now I prefer that over Mr. Hankey, which again, Mr. Hankey was my favorite and still is, I suppose, my favorite pure topwater pattern. But man, that white belly mouse, now I don't always tie it full size like Tommy Lynch's pattern. I think it ends up being like 5.5 inches if you really tie it with the size hooks that he recommends.
Yeah.
Mine end up to be 3.5 to 4 inches.
I like that size way better. I like your size way better. And I like
for these waters.
You'll tie it a little lighter sometimes with some white, more white. And I like that as that's a really nice change up. If the night's not going so well and you want to give them something different to look at.
I don't think the color is the thing that makes the difference there, but it is unique. I tie most of my go-to patterns in a white version. I don't carry as many in white, but almost all of them. I have a white Pendragon. I have a couple white bad mothers, and so I either go real dark with black or I'll go white.
So if you don't think it makes a difference, why do you do it?
Well, what I'm saying is I don't think it's the key difference. I don't think the reason that Lynch's pattern there is so effective is because it's white. I don't think that's
it.
Yep. Whatever. It might be a key thing on certain nights.
Yeah, sure. I've wondered that many times myself. Yeah.
So anyway, that thing really splats, doesn't it?
It does.
It's got a great splat.
Like that. Yeah. And I feel like that rabbit hair just kind of like settles out to the side. It makes this little pancake. Yeah. It's a nice fly.
It's a great fly. Yeah. Those are our favorite mouse emergers. Did we miss any that you guys really like?
No, it's kind of a
think
unique
so.
category.
It is. I don't think anybody else
In
calls
fact,
it
we
that.
invented it. So
That's right.
Yeah.
you missed nothing
it-
because we just defined it. And
It needed a name,
I was going to say,
you know?
self-invented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things need a name. That's a Trout
That's
Bitten
right.
mantra.
There you go.
It's different than Topwater. That's why we're separating it even here in this podcast. Pure Topwater, you get more misses. And with this mousy merger, I mean, is it fair to say that's our favorite way to fish out there, guys, with a mousy merger?
for sure. I mean, it's not to say there aren't nights where there's different things that are more effective.
Oh,
but
yeah.
as far, like it encapsulates the excitement of that night fishing game where you're fishing on the surface, and yet it also sort of gives you this added level of insurance where it's like, yeah, but if they're really hesitant to come up to the surface, that you may still pick up a lot of those fish.
Nice.
So it's great.
I'm not sure I can say it's my favorite because I seem to have caught or done much better on subsurface patterns this summer. And because night fishing is such a low numbers game, whatever produces the best is probably going to be my
Tends to be the
favorite.
favorite. I hear you.
So,
Yeah, I hear
It's
you.
fair.
Austin, next week we'll talk more about wet flies and nymphs purely under the surface. And actually, I don't know, here in just a couple minutes, we'll talk about streamers,
Yep.
which under the surface, all the way under the surface. Before we get to that, though, let's talk about rigging for mouse. Let's talk about rigging for topwater and then these mousy mergers. Walk us through it, guys. I think we're all pretty similar. So what do you have?
I tie a 2-piece, like 6 to 7 foot leader. I start with 20-pound, usually maxima, and then I taper that down to a 15 piece of 15. Sometimes I'll go as low as 12, but I don't go much below that. I just find that you don't need it to be lower than that. And I don't want, in casting such a large kind of air resistant fly, I don't want my line spinning around a lot.
That's a good point.
And I also want to be able to pull it out of brush if I need to. And there's bigger fish out at night. So you need, I love the title of your article. You're going to need a bigger rope.
Need a bigger rope.
yeah, that's a good one.
Yep.
That's the point.
Yeah, it's so nice to know when you hook up with a big fish that you can play it safely and quickly because it's on good stiff leader. So
They go a little crazy at night.
they do.
I've related them to like steelhead, the way, especially a fresh steelhead will jump
true.
and take off and go around rocks and even race toward you.
Yep.
They kind of seem to, whatever, not all of them, but many of these fish that we hook, especially the better ones, seem to kind of go nuts a little bit.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
I want to be ready for that with much stronger tippet. I am never fishing 4X at night. I'm just not doing it. I believe there's no need. And even when we get into wets and nymphs, no, I'm not doing it. It's not worth it.
It's unethical.
No, it's not. But you're going to break off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you are. And think how sad you'll be because you will have hooked one of the biggest fish you'll ever catch.
That's right.
Trevor, my leader's probably similar. I start with a 20-pound butt and then do sort of a short transition to, I usually end in 12 eventually. And I kind of almost like the same theory as a mono rig where most of the power is in the leader and then it's a fast turnover. Yeah. I like to do the same thing with some of these heavy and weirdly weighted flies at night. In addition to that, usually I'll have a dropper tied on at least 2 feet above my point fly. And I may not always have a dropper on a tag up top, but I still like to have it on there all the time because I do like to fish a wet in combination or in tandem with a mouse or a mouse emerger, or, a small streamer or bugger or something like that.
That's a good point about the dropper. Let me back up real quick just to be clear for everybody. We're using a fly line, right? We're using a glow-in-the-dark fly line. Usually, for me, it's a 6 weight. I've done a 5 weight. I've never done the 7 weight out on our waters. I don't think it's necessary. You guys, same, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
I tend to use the Rio Lumalux. SA makes a nice one. The Magnum Glow.
Yeah, the Magnum. Yep.
Yeah,
they're pretty heavy. Weight forward.
Right on, and they'll push whatever you want out there with that short punchy leader. You got no problem for turnover. Yeah, my leader's same as yours. I don't think the leader matters all that much, to be honest. We're talking about having this glow-in-the-dark fly line, so I'm not going to have a 12-foot leader because I want to know right where my fly is. And I like to have, for me, it's usually an 8-foot leader. I'm pretty consistent about that.
Yeah.
Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code TROUTBITTEN10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. I think that dropper is an interesting point, Austin, and I do the same. So we're talking about, again, here's our rig for topwater and then the mouse emerger, and yet we're using this dropper, not a trailer. We're not saying it's trailing behind the mouse, not like it's the last thing on the line, but this dropper that is, like you said, about 2 feet up, 2 feet at least, really. I'll go up to like 3 feet up, depending on the water and what I'm trying to achieve. And so that dropper, Austin, how deep's that riding?
Not that deep, 6 inches maybe?
Right.
At the most, probably.
Right. And so that surprises people. And I've walked people through that rig, and I get a lot of questions about that. So that's why I'm highlighting it here. Yes, that's what we mean. On the end, let's say you have a Pendragon or a Bad Mother or a Moorish Mouse, and then 2 feet up, or maybe a little bit more, a dropper that, let's say the dropper's 4 or 5 or 6 inches. It comes off of the line by dropper, whatever. You got to go look it up, how to create a tag dropper. But that's, it's independent. We're not going in line. It's coming off of the main line, right? And so it has room and room to move and be flexible. And I'm with you, Austin. I usually throw a wet fly up there. For me, it's a Governor, a Professor, what I call a Nighthawk, something
The
like
Dr.
that.
Smith.
The Dr. Smith.
Do you remember when I tied those? That was a few years ago. I tied a whole bunch of them.
I want one.
I'll give you one.
That's what we all need to really be catching the trout out there.
I've done okay on it. Yeah.
So like you said, Austin, it's only riding like 6 inches under, but man, I've caught so many fish on that dropper. And you'd think like, oh, he ate the point fly. You bring him in, as soon as he gets close, you go, that big trout ate my number 4 wet fly.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. It is cool. It's the bait and switch.
I guess the fair question is like, do you think it's dragging down your topwater fly?
I think it could. I think you do have to be a little careful what you use as a wet fly. And I've gotten pretty liberal sometimes with what I use as a wet fly, and to the point of where I think it does make a difference, like even with some woolly buggers and things like that. And I think that I've had times where it's I've watched it pull my drift in a way that I didn't anticipate, especially because I'm tying it to like a 10-pound piece of tag material. So, I think you have to be careful of that, but I also think at night that matters a lot less. So take it with a grain of salt. If it's going to make your overall fishing more effective to have that there, it's still worth it. You just have to kind of keep that in mind when you're fishing.
Agree.
Mm-hmm. And I will say in the shallowest water, maybe where the trout are going to be the spookiest, I've just taken the dropper off. I also like having that dropper there because, as we're going to talk about, I'll often just throw a streamer on there instead of the topwater. They will not come up, even for the mouse emerger. It's real easy for me to just clip off the topwater or the mouse emerger and throw the streamer on, or whatever, maybe a George Harvey pusher fly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Guys, you ever trail anything off of the mouse? That would seem to make more sense. And that's what I did at first. I definitely did that first. I was like, well, I want to trail off of that mouse or that topwater.
No, I'd be neurotic about it because I'm already worried about them, about like missing hookups. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like I'm weed guarding my hook to some extent, or just adding another reason why I might not hook up with that fish. So I think even if I missed one with a trailer, I'd be like, well, screw that. I'm not doing it anymore.
Weed guarding, I like that. Austin, you have something.
I've done it But if you're fishing a mouse emerger or a mouse and it's got 6 inches of leash, I find that it tends to wrap and coil up more because of how it's weighted. I feel like it swings around the main line sometimes more than a lightly weighted tag does. And I spend too much time worrying about how it's actually being presented, if it's stuck to my main line or if it's, I don't know, it's sometimes just
So you put the mouse on a tag when you did it?
Yeah, you asked about trailing behind.
Yeah.
Right?
What I did, and I did this for, I'd say, a month, and I was fishing a lot at night at that time.
Oh, you mean main line?
Yes. Yeah. I just tied
Gotcha.
what they used to say New Zealand style, which is just off the bend. So I came off the bend of the mouse, right? And I went straight to the mouse, no tag, just straight tied to the eye of the mouse. And then I'd go anywhere from, I don't know, 2 feet to 3 feet back, or maybe even, I tried it at all different lengths. But what I realized is that I snagged a lot of fish. I snagged a lot of fish, and that's not cool.
No.
They would definitely be gone for the mouse, and as we've said, they refuse it a lot. They come and slash at it, and then they'd be going back down, and here I am setting, and I'm snagging them in the side, in the tail. Didn't like it. It wasn't good for the fish. It's not fair. And so for me, I just stopped doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I did try different lengths, and I tried different rigging. Austin, I did try mouse on a tag to try to kind of get it out of the way, but still be there. It just didn't work for me.
When you would fish this in line, would you ever tie like the wet going back to the point fly off the trailer hook of the articulated fly, or how would you do that? Because I feel like it would hurt the movement too.
At the time when I was doing that, I wasn't fishing any articulated topwater patterns. So I've never done that.
Yeah, so single hook
because I just kind of swore off the trailer concept at night because of all the snagging. Didn't like it. And if there's somebody out there and they're not snagging fish and it works for them, excellent. Email me.
Yeah,
let me know.
let us know.
Let me know how you do that. Because seriously, there might be a way to rig it and I wouldn't be snagging them. Because it does seem to be more logical. Like, hey, they're going to come look at the topwater thing. They're going to refuse it and then go, ooh, I'll just eat this little wet fly on the way down. Didn't seem to work for me, but that's why I just started rigging it. And I don't know. I just started doing that. Like, okay, I'm going to put the dropper up top. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but boy, it works. And a lot of times when we do this kind of the wiggle and hang, I think that wet fly is just dangling on the surface. It's just touching, just dapping on the surface. Man, I think it drives them crazy. Can't see that. I can't say I've ever seen that at night, but I've done it during the day.
That's cool.
Real briefly, guys, I mean, we've talked about tactics. And again, you got this full Mouse Emerger podcast that you can go check out. And we've talked about in the drifting and swinging episode and in these other episodes leading up to this, like how we like to present the flies. But I don't know, what are your favorite ways that you like to throw the topwater stuff and then the emerger stuff?
I'd say usually it's either the wiggle and hang, which is kind of this, you're lifting a lot of your fly line off the water and you're beginning to move your rod tip back and forth horizontally, like in line with the water surface.
Right.
And you're allowing that oscillation of the fly rod to pull your line up and out of the water and begin to actually impart some vibration back and forth to the fly itself.
Yeah.
And it sort of feels wild to do it without seeing what the fly is doing. But once you've watched and been able to see what the fly does when you get it right, it's pretty cool. And it really looks like an animated swimming mammal. It really comes alive, or like a little frog that's sort of just like pulse.
Yep.
And it's really, there's no real other way to do that, like to really impart that type of movement other than that wiggle.
I think so.
So it's pretty cool, yeah. And it's definitely a learned skill. Like, I mean, you get better at it as you do it more, and as you watch. If you have like a bright moonlit night, or you have some light on the water somewhere, you may not catch any fish there, but take the advantage of the opportunity to watch what your fly is doing, so you can really perfect it.
Good point. I lead into that wiggle and hang with a drift that might end up to be a swing. You have to have a swinging angle, let's say, to make that wiggle and hang work. But that's one of my number one things to do too.
Yeah,
Trevor, with those flies.
Yeah, I like to cast downstream, especially like you're talking about with starting off, kind of leading into the wiggle and hang. Cast downstream and cast in a way that I can kind of maximize the amount of time that my fly is riding against the bank. And as it's doing that, make little twitches, little pops, little skitters.
Nice.
And then allow it to swing out.
So you mean down and across? Yeah,
exactly. Down and across.
Right on. Yeah, we've talked about the slow slide a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, full article on Troutbitten. Go find that. That'll walk you right through.
Yep, with pictures.
If I had to pick one thing to do, let's say the river's 60 feet wide. I'm standing right in the middle of the river, and so I'm casting 20 to 30 feet over against the bank. I like to cast right across, like directly across, or maybe slightly upstream, and hit just as close to the bank as I possibly can with this Topwater or this mouse emerger. And then I got my dropper up top. Make sure I'm not hung up with like moving it just a little bit off the bank. And again, you can see that you're free because your glow-in-the-dark fly line is starting to move. And yeah, there might start to be an arc depending on the water type. I might throw a little bit of a mend, but usually I just kind of let it go. I'm leading that. Well, I'm staying ahead of that, I should say, with my rod tip, but I'm not really moving it off the bank. And that's the idea of the slow slide, is to keep a broadside look to the fish against the bank for as long as possible. And then I like what you said, Austin. I'll pop it, twitch it, little mini strips, especially at night, not moving it too much. And then right at that point where it goes from, well, kind of a drift to then it starts to get more tension and it's really starting to swing, I'll start to lift my rod tip more. And then I'm working into that wiggle and hang. I might do the wiggle and hang a couple times. By this point, it's probably getting to the point where it's almost directly below me.
Right underneath you, yeah.
Downstream of me. And then you could do different things. A lot of people will tell you at that point, drop the rod and then hand twist retrieve or mini strips in. I don't get many hits doing that. I often skip that and just cast again to the bank where the fish really are.
Yeah, I agree.
That's it. There's a lot of other things you can do. Drift them, swing them, do whatever you want with those flies. That's what we said in some of these other episodes. Experiment, right? And you're going to find your favorite way to do it that really matches up with your water types too.
Yeah, so if we can switch gears here a little bit and move into streamers, a lot of what we do in the daytime with streamers, I think, transfers well into the night game. It's a little bit less different than maybe some of the other styles that we're fishing here, but what do you guys find differently about fishing streamers at night in terms of how you like to fish them?
I use pretty much the same rig. I'll say that. Even, like I said earlier, I'll just pop the pen dragon
same rig as the emerger, like you're using the same. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess if it's different water and I really want to get deeper, I might start thinking about line diameter and perhaps going down to 8 pound. That's as thin as I ever go at night. It's like 8 pound. But usually I'm probably staying with the 10 or the 12 pound. Yep. I think slower retrieves is a key thing for me at night.
For sure.
So comparing it to how I'll fish streamers during the daylight, generally, slower retrieves. And I'm always thinking about head position. We've talked about that. Mm-hmm. And so I like the head position in the daytime. Think about this, everybody. The head position down and across. The head is facing down and across. At nighttime, I definitely get more hits when the head is facing up and across. So there's tension to that fly. I think it's because of the wake. I think it's because of the water type we're fishing. And like we've been talking about the lateral line, they find it and all of that. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty convinced of that. However, just like we said in the drifting and swinging, I get a lot of hits on that drift too.
Yeah.
Those are my differences, I guess.
Yeah. What's the slower retrieve about, do you think? Like why do you retrieve it more slowly at night?
I think they need to be able to find it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take it away from them, right? They got to be able to find it and then have a chance to eat it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the ways that I fish a mouse emerger or a mouse, I fish almost identically to streamers in a way. Where I fish downstream, swing them a lot. I do a lot of slow sliding off the bank with streamers. I do a lot of wiggle and hang with streamers.
Do you?
Lots of drifting at the same time. Oh yeah. And it's kind of funny you say that, those fast strips and fast water, maybe the fish aren't there. I've had a few nights this summer where I've done well hanging those streamers, and I also fish a pair of them too. I should mention that with the rigging.
Okay.
I'll fish a heavier streamer on the point, and then like a larger wet or something, or a small bugger on a tag up above about 2 feet again. Same rig. I don't change it. And I found that sometimes if I hang those flies in the current and hold them there, maybe do a little bit of the wiggle, and then every once in a while I'll do a short, like 3 to 6 inch strip and then hang it there. And then another short strip, hang it. Especially if there's some like slow water that's parallel to this faster water, then it like especially works well because I think they'll move over, eat it, move back. But I think there's a lot of parallels in the way that I fish streamers at dark with the same kind of tactics and retrieves and motions that I do on the surface.
So parallels with the tactics, but what's the main difference then?
I think it's just level breaks. You know, we're asking we're thinking about the trout to come do something that they're not normally used to doing. And maybe if your waters somewhere have tons of mice scurrying across them every night and like they're,
That'd be fun.
Yeah, but it's just not that way here. So occasionally we'll have those nights where it's, you know, lights out. They're on that topwater pattern. But for me, I've had more success going underneath and finding the trout maybe just 8 to 12 inches below the surface, sometimes less than that, and doing pretty well when I've been trying to force the topwater game.
That's what often makes me think to go to a streamer in the first place. I think if I'm not, you know, not having the success I thought we would on top, I'm not, you know, the takes haven't been there, and I want to move underneath because maybe it's a cooler night. Maybe I don't think it's, you know, the right season for it, or you know, whatever the reason, or maybe they ate a drowned pendragon, you know, and it was under the surface to begin with, and I'm like, all right, well, I'll throw a split shot on and we'll see if they'll eat it again.
Right.
And so that's one thing I like about the pendragon, is that it's a pattern that you can do that with, which is pretty fun. To be able to just throw a split shot. And I would say that you can do that with a number of night flies, although there aren't very many of the mouse patterns you can really fish as a streamer, other than
I do it with the bad mother.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if
in
you
the
did
winter
it with
time, I would just fish the bad mother with a split shot in front of it.
Cool.
But
That's awesome.
I wouldn't do that with a Lynch's mouse, you know?
No, right. It would be
wouldn't
weird.
work.
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah, it
sense.
wouldn't work.
Although maybe it
Right.
would have like a rising action. you know?
Maybe.
Maybe. That'd be, who knows?
It's an interesting one.
Let me ask you guys this, because I have a theory about like the time of night. So this year, it seems like when it first starts to get dark in the evening, I have an easier time catching them on streamers when let's say it's 9 o'clock, and maybe they haven't settled, and this is just my theory. I think maybe they haven't settled into the comfort of the dark yet. But they do feel pretty good about eating streamers underneath the surface. And as the night goes on and as the hours go on, they get adjusted and they get comfortable and they start to look up, and maybe they get more risk averse and they start to eat surface flies. Because for me, it's often later in the night when I start to do better on surface flies.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys feel like about that, but
I agree. I think they get a lot more risk tolerant as the night goes on. And I think it is because I perceive at least that they haven't been harassed in a while, right? And they feel the protection of darkness. And I know there are night predators, you know, there are raccoons and other thing. I've even, you know, herons. I think probably we've all encountered a heron at night, which will scare the living light out of you. But
It's a unique sound.
it is a unique sound. But I think they're less common. And I think that because of that, I agree with you. I think that they do become more cavalier as the night goes on. But that's an interesting point. I'm oftentimes not there right at dark. I'm there a little bit after that. So I don't know that I've even fished enough of that twilight to know that. But that's a cool realization.
When I do get out there and I fish that transition time, I often do I'll start with streamer or wets, but I like a streamer because it really does. It frees me up to fish in a bunch of different ways. I feel like with the streamer, I can cast at a bunch of different angles, target different depths, especially. That's important. You said about the levels, Austin, being the main difference. Yeah, with one of my favorite streamers, night streamers, I call it a rogue. It's really, really light, and its sink rate is super slow. It sinks, but it's super slow, and I feel like I can just fish at I can hold it like 6 inches underneath and just keep it fishing 6 inches underneath. At the same time, I could let it sink more, or I could add a split shot and get it down quicker, or I could put a cone head or something like that. Yeah, with a streamer, I don't know. I can just do so many different things with it, cover various water conditions. I catch plenty of fish. I feel like I catch a lot of fish, in pocket water, especially with streamers at night.
right on.
And I wouldn't want to do that with a topwater pattern like we talked about.
Right,
or the places you could
Yeah.
hit in that pocket water and expect them to eat it are very, very small group of places compared to what I think I can do with a streamer.
Sure.
And the presentation styles too, again, like just all angles, speeds, and levels. I fish them more on cold nights because I think they won't come up to the top. Bright nights too. We've talked about that. The light
Yeah, I agree.
conditions, how we don't really like to be on the top necessarily. Well, we'd like to, but the fish don't seem to want to come up to the top. So when I want to be underneath, I'll use that streamer. Well, if I want to be bigger than a wet fly, right? We'll get into wet flies and nymphs next week. But, there's a lot of sculpins in our waters. There's a lot of dace and sculpins and crayfish and small trout and other bait fish and small suckers and whatever there's a lot of small creatures down there. If you fish it right, and if the fish are in the right mood, you get a really good chance at night doing things with a streamer. And like we could talk through the tactics, but I really feel like whatever you would do in the daytime with a streamer, try it at night. Maybe slow it down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think being closer gives you more control. And then you're much more aware of what your fly is doing. You'll be more comfortable. Cast a little more. Don't try to get long casts and long strips and drifts.
Yeah.
Other tips for the tactics there, guys?
Not really.
Versus daytime?
No, I do think it changes it a lot depending on how much weight you want to fish with your streamer. You can, anything from a pretty heavily weighted streamer, which will give you the opportunity to fish like longer, slower stretches that have some depth to them. I've fished those with like a heavier streamer that I'll just crawl across the bottom and do that hand twist retrieve. But then I also have some, Rich Strollis's Alter Ego and some other kind of like a mini sex dungeon too, or there's some other like pretty lightly weighted streamers that I'll fish that I feel like are going to ride a little bit higher in the water column, and I might fish that. I do fish that a little differently. I don't crawl it across a stretch. I'm fishing it a little more actively through areas. So like you said, you can be really versatile. It's a nice tactic to use if you want to just kind of fish all around you in a lot of different varied water types.
Mm-hmm. I'll cover water faster that way too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd echo what Trevor said, and the idea of just work your way down as the fishing presents itself. If you're just under the surface and still nothing's happening, then slowly change those levels until you're dragging, or not dragging, but kind of rolling or jigging along the bottom.
Jigging's another thing.
Yeah.
Jig streamers are like a big deal right now. They can be really good at night. I think try not to jig real fast. Don't make dramatic movements, but just more subtle ones. Yeah. I do like to feel, if I'm trying to be close to the bottom, then I often like to feel the bottom. We'll talk about that more next week in the nymphing, but I don't like guessing. I like to either try to ride just under the surface with that streamer, with a lighter streamer. Bill's Grinch is a good one. We've talked about Bill Dell, our buddy Bill Dell. I've been using his Grinch. It is,
that would be.
It sinks really slowly. It has some weight built in, and there's some water weight, but it's the Arctic fox and some other things that keep it sinking slowly. It's cool. I've done pretty well with it, and I haven't fished it for that long at night. I like it.
That's neat.
I'll say too, downsizing streamers. I kind of touched on that last week, but don't be afraid to go smaller and smaller in attempts to bring some fish to hand. I often do well on patterns that are 2 inches long
or smaller.
So
everybody thinks about big flies at night, big trout, big flies. And I just reread Humphrey's night chapters in Trout Tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's talking about fishing number 12s and number 14s sometimes.
Right.
Nymphs and wet flies.
Yeah, there you go.
Which are like 3/4 of an inch.
Yeah.
If that, with the tail.
Bash line is the same.
And so I know I get a little carried away. I just do. It's hard for me to have confidence in those smaller flies, but I think we all should, especially when things are tough. Maybe even for a couple of nights in a row, if it's tough, like you got to be willing to make those changes like we talked about last week. If there's something you haven't tried, try it. And I know that for myself, one of the things I don't try enough is just going smaller. They'll eat it. If they're not eating the big one, we've all agreed here in other podcasts, in other conversations we've had, that size/profile is the most important thing about your fly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure why I don't go dramatically smaller a lot of times.
Yeah.
Anything else, guys? If Josh was here, what would he say? What would Josh's advice be, guys?
I feel like he fishes I don't know that he fishes a lot of other streamers at night other than adding split shot to the Pendragon. And then there's a fly I've tied called the Gypsy Queen. That's kind of like a derivation of your Rogue, but it's just a little bigger.
Just had to be bigger.
Had to be bigger. I know. And
the Tiny Dancer is the small version.
The Tiny Dancer and the Gypsy Queen. I like it.
That's what we'll call it.
I don't think you can call it that anymore, Trevor. You're gonna have to call it like the Spongy Queen.
Right, I know.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
That's a good reference. Yeah. Gypsy Moth is out.
Gypsy Queen is canceled.
I don't know. I thought it was honoring. I mean, it's a pretty fly.
Oh, okay.
It's cool. Like, it's like, why does everyone have to assume it's negative?
Gypsy Queen.
But yeah, I've had some fun nights fishing a pair of them, more of a Rogue and a Gypsy Queen on the monorig. That's super
crazy.
Fun. Yeah. And I've done well with it, really well with it. And I feel like I have so much control over it because of the monorig, obviously. And there's enough weight that it will hold water weight that you can really get some distance out of it. And you can just work it around.
I feel the whole thing.
Go,
Oh my goodness. I've had
you can get it wherever you want with that weight.
Legitimately good nights.
So real quick then, last thing. You brought up fishing the monorig. I don't do it with topwater. Well, I rarely do it with topwater stuff or mouse emerger stuff.
Right.
Not that it wouldn't work either. I've done it. If you're close enough, and there's water weight in those patterns, you can do it.
Sure.
But I don't like it. I do it a fair amount with the streamers. If I was just nymphing, and I often will have my mono rig on for nymphing, then I want to fish a streamer. Okay, pop the bottom nymph on and throw a streamer on. I've done what you're talking about there, Trevor. And, I have a night sighter built into my mono rig. Do you do that?
Yep, I do.
Yeah. So that's what makes the difference. So you could see it.
It does make a difference.
I did it just the other night. Nothing else was working. I got 2 hits, then I had to go home. But I got 2 hits, so I was just fishing a pair of wets.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, we build the mono rig so it has casting power. It can push itself and it can punch itself out there. And there's no air resistance to a pair of what did I have? Like a pair of about number 4. I think they're governors. There's no air resistance, and there's some hook weight there. The casting was no trouble, but I wasn't trying to go more than 30 feet out anyway. It's interesting.
It is.
And we'll talk more about those longer leaders next week, too. All right, there it is. Topwater, emergers, and streamers for the night game. As we were setting up this skill series, I knew it would be different. I knew these episodes would be long, yet still feel incomplete. Because the fact is, fishing for trout after dark can be just as complex or intricate as it is in the daylight. Which is to say, you can make things as simple or as complicated as you like out there. So take a Pendragon or Lynch's whitebelly and walk up a dark trail some night. Pick a new moon, target the bankwater, and work downstream. Do that for a few nights in a row and you'll almost certainly get hits. You might also catch the biggest trout of your life. Then choose another handful of nights and take only your favorite streamer. Cast it at all angles and depths, but think about working the long fly in softer water than you might in the daylight. Move it a little slower and perhaps a little higher in the water column. That's the thing about this night fishing series. We're highlighting what is different about fishing after dark rather than building each skill from the ground up. And no collection of fishing knowledge will ever be complete. So we have one more episode for you. Next week we wrap up this night fishing skills series with episode 6, Nymphs, Wets, and Harvey Pushers. We're looking forward to it. Hey, thanks again to our show sponsors. You hear their ads, drop them a line and tell them thank you for supporting this podcast. Dr. Trevor Smith, will you read us out?
I will. Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts over 1,000 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags, too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, currently featuring the Troutbitten Tips series in collaboration with Wilds Media. These are short, useful, and unique tips for your fly fishing life. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
It doesn't even pause.
No pause.
I just blew right through it.
No pause.
we're going to fish these at night. These are going to work.
That thing really splats.
I'm on to something.
It's unethical.
Just want to catch fish
The dead troll.
every day.
That's a cool idea. I haven't done that.
Think how sad you'll be.
And that's not cool.
Just want to catch one.
I don't try to like whip it down.
Good.
Hang it.
In the fishing log.
That's crazy.